Chapter 13. Hasty Departure.
It had been 2 more days. They had returned to the surface and stayed in Thoraine's flat. As they had come up out of the ground, things had eased a little between him and his parents, and Taylor started to joke around a little again. But he fought with his father. Taylor championed his cause over and over in every way he could imagine. Alas, the request for help had fallen on deaf ears. His father insisted that peace had been the only answer throughout his entire time on the planet, which, he reminded Taylor of often, was a very long time. Last night, both of them had thrown up their hands in aggravation at each other. Thorane stood on the sidelines, smiling. "What are you smiling at?" Trisha asked him. "Them," Thorane smiled. "I have known both for a long time, and even though they don't know it, they're exactly the same," Thorane replied. "They argue the same points," Thorane added. Trisha smiled on. She was starting to see it as well. Taylor and his father were not fighting as much as he and his father were talking in their own way. She noticed Taylor's mother had accepted the behavior from the two. Trisha woke early the next morning and wandered into the kitchen. Taylor's mom poured her a cup of coffee. "Yannicka?" Trisha asked, taking a warm cup into her hands. "Yeah?" she asked in Dutch, but Trisha understood what she meant. "Do they always fight like that?" Trisha asked. "Nay," she said and smiled. "Most of the time it's worse. It's how they talk. They've always talked with passion to each other," she said. "So you're saying they're not mad?" "Nay, she said. "They're still arguing about the same topic, too. I think they're coming around," she smiled. "Taylor is, I know that. I know he's not saying it, but he's happy you two are back in his life," Trisha said. "Well, that's good. I'm going to arrange a rice tafel for tonight. Maybe if we stuff their faces full of food, they won't be able to argue for a while," Yannicka said, laughing. Trisha joined her and laughed as well. "Is there anything I can help with?" Trisha asked. "Ha! You asked for it. Now you're in trouble," Yannicka laughed again. Taylor wandered into the kitchen and gave Trisha a kiss and gave his mom a quick hug. Although light and brief, Yannicka's smile grew ear to ear. Taylor had gotten up this morning and decided for the day he would let the battle go. They would be leaving for California in a couple of days, and he wanted one day and night where he could just enjoy being with his family again. His mother and Trisha, it seemed, felt this. Soon after breakfast, Trisha, Amy, and Yannicka went out into Amsterdam, and they would not reappear until that night. Taylor and Thorane headed out in the street to go to a cafe. He opened a storage garage, and there sat the orange bike, partially covered with a tarp. "I thought you had lost that motorcycle," Tanar asked Thorane, chuckling. Thorane smiled. "No, after they fished it out of the canal, I went to auction, and I bought it again," Thorane said, and seemed to blush a little. "Am I missing something?" Taylor asked. "Well, let me tell you the story as we walk." And with that, they began to walk. Thorane told Taylor of the World Cup, a crazy story about a motorcycle and a grand jump. When Thorane pointed out the spot he had jumped over the canal, Taylor looked at the gap and he shook his head, laughing. "I swear, Thorane, you were nuts to think you could make it," Taylor joked. "I completely agree with you," Thorane said. "After that stunt I went into hiding, and then I went to Utah," Thorane replied. "It was a good thing, too," Tanar explained. "He was a bit loud in that life," he finished, smiling. They got to the cafe and had coffee within a moment. Taylor once again relaxed into the amazing laid-back culture of Amsterdam. He would be happy when he could come back and spend some real time here. Tanar, Thorane, and Taylor spent the day hanging around, not doing much of anything. Taylor picked up a book for a moment and then he set it down. "Too much reading?" his father asked. "Maybe," Taylor replied. "I'm sure I'll be back to them soon," Taylor replied. "You still learn anything from them?" Tanar replied. "Yeah, but I know what you're referring to. They're starting to run out of new information," Taylor said. "They can still offer a great deal of comfort, even when they stop being able to teach you anything," Tanar reassured. "One thing I can't figure out," Taylor asked. "Why you were born? How when every vampire in history has been unable to conceive?" Tanar stated. "Yes. How did you know that?" Taylor asked. "Because I wonder the same thing every night," Tanar said and laughed. Taylor could not help the giggles from taking over, and they both had a great laugh. Later that night, Taylor walked into Thoraine's office, and they spoke for a while, and then Tanar came and called them to dinner. They walked into the dining area, and that is when they saw the Indonesian rice table. The meal has many wonderful flavors in it. They walked along the table, looking at the food like young children. Thorane had a large smile on his face. "Prachtig," he said, and clapped his hands together. "Holy crap! This looks incredible," Taylor said. "Wait till you eat it," Taylor's mom smiled. "Did you make all this?" Taylor said. "Oh God, no," she laughed. The evening breathed easy. Taylor felt as close to normal as he could. His mother and his father gave him many hugs and pats on the back. They had a need to touch him, and although he was still standoffish toward them, tonight he had let it go. His father got a beer and offered one to everyone, and once the beer began to flow, it didn't stop for a while. The Thorane was the only one that was somewhat restrained, although even he enjoyed the meal as much or more than the rest. They all sat at the table full of food and beer. They talked a little bit, but the conversation was slow to allow them to digest. A white-faced aide came into the room. He had news. Thorane stood and went to his aide. A few minutes later he came back to the table but remained standing. "Taylor, Scott has broken loose," Thorane said. He laid a hand on Amy's shoulder. She turned and looked up at him and knew something was horribly wrong. Tiffany attempted to stop him. "He killed her," Thorane said in a whisper. "What?" Amy said, tears springing into her eyes. She collapsed into Thorane's arms and sobbed into him. Taylor sat dumbfounded. The mood switched from light to dark in a moment. They sat silently, other than the sounds of sobbing from Amy. Amy looked up at Taylor for direction. Then he realized he would be the one who would have to take action. "We need to go to Utah right now," Taylor said and stood up, tossing his napkin aside. The night was over. Thorane and Trisha helped Amy up. They did their best to comfort her, but she was becoming just as intent on getting back to Utah. Taylor's parents went with them all the way to the street. Taylor walked out onto the street. "Dad, I know your society has always gone well because you were peaceful, but to allow all those humans to die and be converted with no warning is not right, and you know it. When I'm done in Utah, I'm going to California, where I'll fight with my friends. I hope to see you and yours there, too," Taylor said to him. He embraced his dad. "I love you, Dad, and it's good to have you back." Taylor then turned and gave his mother a hug. "I love you, Mom. I wish I could stay longer," Taylor said. "After it's all over, you can come back and spend as much time as you want," she said, and kissed him on the cheek. Trisha hugged them. "It's wonderful to meet you," Trisha said to both of them. "It was a great pleasure to meet you," his father smiled. "You take care of yourself and him for me?" Taylor's mom asked. Trisha smiled. "Ik zal mijn beste doen." They were then loaded into the car and off to the airport. As they taxied out to the runway, everyone's eyes still gazing out at the Dutch landscape. "We have to come back here," Taylor sighed. "I always say that as well," Thorane said. Normally, this would have brought up all sorts of conversation, but the abrupt end of the trip had tainted the conversation. The flight was still long. They did their best to comfort Amy, and by the time they had landed, Amy had a look of grim determination on her face. Her anger was high, but she knew there was only one person who could right this wrong.